Hello and welcome to Podcast.init, the podcast about Python and the people who make it great. When you're ready to launch your next app, you'll need somewhere to deploy it, so check out Linode. With private networking, shared block storage, node balancers, and a 200 gigabit network, all controlled by a brand new API, you've got everything you need to scale. Go to podcastinit.com/Linode to get a $20 credit and launch a new server in under a minute. To get worry-free releases, download GoCD, the open-source continuous delivery server built by ThoughtWorks. You can use their pipeline modeling and value stream map to build, control, and monitor every step from commit to deployment in one place. And with their new Kubernetes integration, it's even easier to deploy and scale your build agents. Go to podcastinit.com/GoCD to learn more about their professional support services and enterprise add-ons. And visit the site at podcastinit.com to subscribe to the show, sign up for the newsletter, and read the show notes. Your host as usual is Tobias Macey, and today I'm interviewing Amjith Ramanujam about DBCLI, an umbrella project for command-line database clients with autocompletion and syntax highlighting. So, Amjith, could you start by introducing yourself?
Yeah, as Tobias introduced, I'm Amjith. I work as a senior software engineer at Netflix for my day job. And as a side project, I started DBCLI open source organization.
And do you remember how you first got introduced to Python?
Yes, that actually happened in 2010. I was a C++ programmer before then, and someone told me that I should learn functional programming, and Haskell is the best way to do that because it's a purely functional language. So I went through the Learn You a Haskell for Greater Good book, and I reached the chapter where they introduced list comprehension, and I was completely blown away. I've seen list comprehension in math before, but to be able to express that as a programming construct and be so succinct and yet be, so clear and it doesn't obscure any of the complexity, I immediately fell in love, and I wanted to find a language that supported list comprehension that can also get me paid for writing code in it. So that's how I got started with Python, and I started going to our local Python users group. This was back in Utah. It was a set of friendly bunch of geeks hanging out and talking about Python. So that's how it all got started.
As we mentioned, the project that we're talking about today is the DBCLI grouping of clients. So I'm wondering if you can just describe a bit about the parent organization that you formed and some of the individual clients that fall under that.
Yeah, absolutely. So DBCLI, it's an abbreviation. It stands for Database Command Line Interfaces, and it's an open source organization that builds command line clients for different databases. Right now, we have 3 separate products that comes out of it. One is called PGCLI for Postgres, and MyCLI for MySQL, and MS SQL CLI for the MS SQL server. The MS SQL CLI is actually created by Microsoft, and they chose to fork the PGCLI project, and they wanted to bring it under the DBCLI organization umbrella, which we were very grateful for, and it's built and supported entirely by Microsoft.
And which one of the clients was the original client, and what was your motivation for creating it?
Yeah, so PGCLI was the first one. When I started it, it was not an umbrella organization or anything. It was just a personal project. PGCLI was created out of a scratching itch that I had. I was a big, huge fan of BPython, which is, if you don't know what BPython is, it is a fancy REPL, which is a replacement for the regular Python REPL that comes by default. It has autocompletion, syntax highlighting, and as you start typing, it'll suggest, doc strings for different functions and so on. And I missed that feature whenever I was working in PSQL, which is the default Postgres client. So I wanted that, and at the same time, Jonathan Slenders reached out to me via Twitter and asked if I'd be interested in trying out this new library that he's building called Prompt Toolkit. And I took a look at the examples that he provided, and I thought it was a phenomenal idea, and it fit perfectly into what I had in mind. And so I decided to use that as an opportunity to try out his library as well as build something that I wanted for my own usage. That's how PGCLI was born.
And did you know Jonathan ahead of time? Did you guys have a history of collaboration and that's why he reached out to you? Or was there a particular project that he was aware of that you had done that caused him to reach out?
So we had met believe it or not, in an island in France for DjangoCon Europe. I was doing a lightning talk there about BPython. Since I'm a big proponent of BPython, I would just, pitch BPython at any stage I could get. And I think he must have heard that talk, and I think we had dinner together that night, just, as a group. And I asked him some really dumb questions like, so you're from Belgium, you must speak Belgian. And he said, no, Amjith, there is no such thing as a Belgian. I speak good Dutch. So I think that must have stuck with him. And so after I came back from the conference, about a month later, he reached out via Twitter and asked, he's building something in command lines and would I be interested in exploring it? So yeah, that's how it started.
And at what point did you decide that you needed to create the umbrella organization for some of the different projects? And what is the benefit that it provides to have them all grouped together like that?
So when I created PGCLI, the reception for the project was phenomenal. Like it blew away any of my expectations. I expected, a couple of people to use it. Maybe I'll receive, one or two pull requests every now and then or something. But it topped the Hacker News posting, and a lot of people adopted it and they loved it. And then I started getting requests for MySQL version of this, and I decided that if we're going to build multiple versions of PGCLI for different databases, it might be worth actually creating a GitHub organization, because it's not my personal project anymore. Because at that point I had accumulated a bunch of core developers who were contributing code, and a bunch of issues were coming in, and I had a lot of help at that point. And so I decided that this is not a single person's project anymore. This is a community project, and I should make that clear by creating a GitHub organization and making this project as part of the organization, not as under my own personal name. The advantage that comes with it is that now we have a collection of libraries that we have created as part of the DBCLI, as well as for writing different command line applications, makes it easier and so on, that came out of it. And people are, the core developers who work on this feel like this is their project. It's not just this one guy's creation.
Are there any shared aspects of the different clients or shared libraries that you leverage to be able to abstract out some of the common requirements for the different clients?
Originally, when I started, no. I literally took the PGCLI code at some point and then forked it to create MyCLI client, which was for MySQL. I should have thought better. I should have abstracted out like the completion engine into its separate library. I should have pulled out the table generation and these kinds of things, but I did not. But then later on, we started to notice, projects were starting to diverge. Like some of the core devs were in MyCLI field, they extended it to do different things, and PGCLI area, they extended it to do different things. And so it started to diverge, and now we are trying to pull out the common components. And I know that CLI helpers is one of the libraries that came out of this, which both of the projects use, which makes it easy for us to use different table formats and manage our configuration files and so on. That was actually not created by me. That was created by the lead maintainer for MyCLI right now, called Thomas. That was his brainchild. So that is one of the bigger pieces that is commonly shared between both of the projects. We're still working on pulling out the various different common functionalities into different libraries. It's a work in progress.
And you mentioned that Microsoft is donating the MS SQL client to the DBCLI organization. Is there any particular set of requirements or best practices that you have published for anybody who wants to write a client for a new database in order for it to be able to fit well under the DBCLI umbrella or interoperate or share any of those library dependencies?
When I created the fork for MyCLI, I realized that there was one single file that actually talks to the database itself that needed to be modified, but everything else was pretty much the same. And this was again reinforced by the engineers from Microsoft when they said, we looked at PGCLI, we decided to create fork of that for MS SQL, and they were able to whip something up together in about a week by simply replacing that one file with the appropriate drivers that spoke to the MS SQL database servers. And I think that is the biggest accolade that I have ever received for my code, which is, I didn't have to change a lot. It was nicely packaged up, and it was carved up into neat little pieces. So I could just replace this one component and it started working. So for the people who are interested in creating more of these types of command line and clients for different databases, if you reach out to me or to any of the core devs in the DBCLI org, we'll be more than happy to guide you through the different files that you need to edit in order to achieve, create your own project. The only reason we haven't done that ourselves is because of the lack of time. Like all of us, all the core devs, everybody has day jobs, and we are all just doing this for fun as side projects in our free time. So it's just a matter of getting the time to implement this same thing for multiple databases.
And in terms of the functionality that the clients provide over the native interfaces that are provided with the different engines, what are some of the most useful capabilities?
So the couple of obvious things that come to mind are things like the autocompletion. So autocompletion was critical for me from the very beginning. I wanted it to automatically suggest the table name. So I wanted the autocompletion to be context aware, meaning after the from keyword in the select star from, it will only suggest the table names in that particular database that I've selected. And then inside the where clause, select star from table name where, it will only suggest the column names from that table that I have specified in the previous from clause. So I wanted the context-aware autocompletion. That is one of the things that sets it apart from the existing default database clients. I know that PSQL can do some of that, but it kind of falls apart if you do a little bit more complex things like a join statement, or if you start using aliases for table names and such. It doesn't quite complete things for you. So that was one of the things. And, I liked my terminal to be colorful. So syntax highlighting is another one of those obvious things that sets it apart from the other command line clients. And one of the things that I constantly go back and reinforce in these clients is they have to be very, very user friendly. So one of the things that I've noticed in MySQL's default client is if you type SEL and you hit the tab key, it'll not autocomplete. But if you type SEL all uppercase and then you hit the tab key, it'll autocomplete, select as the autocompletion. And that's such a trivial change. It should be just case insensitive. Why couldn't they just make that into a feature into the built-in default? So just putting some thought into the design of the actual program makes it that much more easier for a user to use it. And so that, I think, is the highlight of the programs that we have built, which is all these tools, we use it on a daily basis. And as we notice anything that is introducing a little bit of friction, we go and fix it right away and make sure that it is extremely user friendly.
One of the things that can be challenging when dealing with databases is that you can occasionally have a query that returns a large volume of data, either because you didn't filter it down properly or because you actually need to be able to process that amount of data. So are there any optimizations that you've added in terms of how the client interacts with the database engine to be able to simplify or alleviate some of those challenges?
Yeah, so these optimizations kind of came on later. The initial implementation was very focused on just having it easier for the user interaction on a day-to-day basis. And this was designed as an exploratory tool where people who didn't know a database would just jump into it and start using it and discover the tables and columns as they start writing the queries. But then later on, we found out that it doesn't work really well with really large tables with thousands of table names and hundreds of column names and so on. So one of the things we have done is made the autocompletion refresher run in the background thread. So as you start typing, it'll still be responsive and it'll start to complete as much as it has fetched from the database. But if it is still fetching things, it just downgrades into a dumb client where you just continue to type your query, and as soon as the autocompletions have come back and we have populated the data structures with all the necessary tables and columns, it'll start appropriately recommending things. One of the other things is we tried to use the Python's generator functionality quite a bit in all the places, and so all the results that come back from the database are held as cursors, which are generators, and so we don't end up consuming the generator until the very last second when we are ready to display the table itself. This helps with keeping the memory footprint slightly smaller, and also again we go a little bit further by asking the question where if a user is doing select star from a table name and they have not given a limit clause or no where clause or anything, and we realize that the result set has more than 1,000 rows, we actually ask a question: are you sure you want to see the results because you have more than 1,000 rows? And the user can then choose to say yes or no, and if they choose yes, then we'll actually consume the generator, format it into a nice table, and then we'll try to display that for the user. But usually the users kind of catch themselves saying like, oh, 1,000 rows, that doesn't make sense. I guess I must have forgotten a where clause, and then they immediately say no, and then they switch back to modifying the query and so on. So those are the optimizations that I could think of.
And in the process of building a client to communicate with the database, I imagine that there are certain edge cases or weird implementations or just strange behaviors that you've encountered. So is there anything that was particularly notable or that you found most interesting or surprising in the process of building these various clients?
So Postgres client was much harder than MySQL client, which was a bit of a surprise for me because Postgres is usually touted as a better database than MySQL. The things that made it hard for me with Postgres was that in MySQL, show tables or describe table or show columns from a table, these are all actual database queries that you can send to the database and it'll give you results back. Whereas Postgres does not have the equivalent of these kinds of SQL type queries. Instead, what it has is backslash commands, and these backslash commands are called meta commands in Postgres. And these meta commands translate, it's like a backslash D will give you the list of all the tables, and then backslash DT and then, or backslash D and then a table name will describe how that, what the table has as in columns and triggers and so on. These shortcut backslash commands are actually implemented as extremely complicated SQL queries that are not implemented in the database itself, but they are implemented in PSQL, the client library. So when I was creating PGCLI, I had to spend nearly 2 weeks or so translating the C code that does these backslash D into SQL commands into Python code that would do the exact same thing, which was quite a pain in the neck. But once we were able to do that, now that is actually a standalone library. It's called PG Special, and this library came out of DBCLI as well, which it implements these backslash commands as actual SQL queries. And if there are other libraries or other clients who are writing a client for Postgres, they could now use this PG Special module to implement these backslash commands for themselves. So that was a little bit of a surprise for me, and I'm glad we now have a library to handle that, and there are other projects that are actually using PG Special, which is a nice complement.
And so in terms of running and maintaining the project, what have been some of the most notable aspects of that, both positive and negative?
So let me pitch the negative first, and then I'll talk about the positive. So I think every open source maintainer at some point in their life has kind of or gone through a little bit of burnout. I didn't quite experience an entire burnout, but I did come very close, and I was able to pull back and rescue myself. And the way this happened was as I was bootstrapping MyCLI, and that was going really well, I started to obsess over the project. Every waking minute, I was starting to think about like, oh, these issues were filed on PGCLI. I need to port this feature from MyCLI to PGCLI, and this feature request sounds really awesome. How am I going to implement it? And this was constantly in the back of my mind. I just could not get it out of my head, and it was starting to affect my day-to-day life and activities. Fortunately, one of my coworkers at the time, he asked me if I wanted to learn how to longboard in a class. This is something that I never really would have gone and done myself, but since he asked me, I was like, yeah, sure, why not? And it turns out longboarding takes every single neuron in my brain to keep myself upright on the longboard. So that was a nice 2-hour break that I received where I couldn't think about anything else except live in the moment, learn how to stand on a longboard and not fall. That kind of worked as an escape hatch, and that happened once a week. I was able to practice how to stop thinking about my projects all the time and recover from it. But that was a good wake-up call that I catch myself even now when I'm working on things. If I start to obsess over something, I need to dial back and stop thinking or worrying about it. Some of the positive aspects of running the open source project, one of the biggest positive things that has come out of this is people always say that, if you have diversity of thought, then you just end up producing a much better product or a much better result. And I got to experience that firsthand. I mean, we all have read this in blog posts, and intuitively it makes sense in some level, but to be able to experience this firsthand was phenomenal. To give you a very concrete example, one of the users or one of the early developers suggested that we should automatically auto-escape some of the table names. For example, Postgres only allows lowercase table names without quotes around them. If you want to have uppercase or mixed case table names, then you have to put quotes around them. And I was very hesitant to introduce a feature like that simply because I basically told him that after a user has typed in the query, we have to scan the query, figure out if it has mixed case table names, and then go in and modify the query to automatically add quotes to it. And that sounds kind of dangerous to me. I don't want to mess with the user's queries automatically. And fortunately, the user, the developer didn't listen to what I was saying. And so he went out and implemented the solution. What he did was, when we scan through the table or when we scan through the database to fetch all the table names, he automatically noticed if there are any tables that have a mixed casing or a keyword is used as a table name, then instead of listing just the table name, he would list the table name with quotes around it. And so when you start typing it and you say select star from, in the drop down menu, you will see the table name with mixed casing with quotes around it. And so when you select it from the menu, it'll automatically be escaped for you, which was a very nice solution where it still gives the control to the user. At the same time, you're not messing around with the query. And I was completely blown away by the solution. There are many examples of these kinds of solutions where people have just implemented phenomenal features that wouldn't have thought of myself. So it was a nice reminder that having diversity of thought just produces a better quality product at the end.
You recently handed over the primary maintainership of the majority of the projects to other people so that you could step back. I'm wondering if you can just discuss a bit about your decision-making process around that and some of the impact that has had for you on your personal and professional life.
Yeah, sure. So now PGCLI is maintained by a good friend of mine called Irina Truong. She is now the lead maintainer for PGCLI, and MyCLI is now maintained by Thomas Roten. They both joined the project as core devs in the early stages of the project. The reason I decided to give the control to them is because I am a huge believer of, having the space and stepping back to let someone else grow. So I've been in teams in the past where you have, 4 senior developers and then 2 junior folks joining the team. And the junior folks have no way to grow and sort of make the mistakes and learn for themselves and grow into a senior engineer, because the senior folks tend to take all the interesting projects, or they tend to stop the juniors before they make the mistake. And then the juniors kind of tend to learn to become dependent on the seniors. And so what I have found is when the seniors leave the team, the juniors automatically try to fill that role by stepping into that, maybe, stumbling at the first couple of steps, but then they grow to that role and they become seniors, and then they grow and so on. So I wanted that to happen for the folks that were in the team. And also it gave me a nice opportunity for me to sort of, hand over the reins to some of the most prolific contributors to the project and give them complete control, and then let them, I've taken it to as far as I could in my vision, and now it's up to them, whatever vision they have, they get to take it and run with it. So it's been a great experience so far, because it has definitely freed up some of my time. I don't have to think about what is this going to be doing in the future and any of that. They care about that. I get to work on issues, fix the bugs, and answer questions that comes up in the GitHub issues. It's really nice, and it's such a relief.
And was it difficult to find and identify people to become those core maintainers, or were they just people who had naturally gravitated to the project and started becoming involved of their own accord?
So I've been very diligent in inviting people to join the core team. So it is not a huge ordeal. You submit, 2 substantial pull requests, and then I immediately send out an email asking, hey, would you be interested? Because you obviously care enough to send pull requests to the project. Do you want to join the team and make the change from the inside, sort of a thing? And people have been very receptive to those kinds of requests, and they join in, and it gives them a nice incentive where they feel like they are part of the team that maintains the project, and they start to contribute even more. In my area, with these 2 selections, it was not a very difficult selection at all. So they both have been longtime contributors, and they have both done substantial amounts of rewrites of the code that I had huge confidence that they were thinking in the right direction, and it was it came naturally that they both took over.
And in terms of the project itself, you optimize on being nice over being correct or over being right. So I'm wondering if you can talk a bit about what you mean by that and how it manifests.
So this is mentioned in the About page in DBCLI, which is we optimize for being nice rather than being right. The reason I say this is because originally, when I launched the project, I wanted to give a bit of human feeling to the project, which is there is a human being behind this. There is someone who deeply cares about this project who is working on this. And so there's even more that I go into the details of the About page, where I talk about, you will not be discriminated. I will be responsive to your requests, because these are things that I noticed in other open source projects that have been successful, which is they're very welcoming to the newcomers. They don't chide silly questions or questions that have been answered before, and so on. So I wanted to embrace that culture that made those projects successful. And so I decided to optimize on that, and a nice outcome out of that has been we get requests from a bunch of different countries, and one of the things is anytime that there is like an abrupt question that comes across as very brusque and almost to the point of being rude, I check the username, and it is usually someone who's not a native English speaker, and there is a high chance that they probably typed in the question in Google Translate and they tried to translate it into English and they pasted it over. And so we take the extra step there, and then we ask, we rephrase the question that they have asked and ask, is this what you're asking for? And then it's kind of smooth sailing from then on. One of the greatest advantages of this approach has been we have not had any users who have been complaining or being aggressive, or we haven't had the problems that a lot of open source projects face, which is we haven't had any amount of backlash or anything in any sense. People have generally been very, very welcoming and very, very grateful that this project exists, which I've been very lucky to have great users as well. So, yeah.
And how has that philosophy and that approach to the project affected the reception of people using the project and the feedback that they provided?
Yeah, so some of the issues that we receive typically start out by saying, hey, this is a great project, I just found it, I use it every day. Oh, and by the way, I just noticed this as something that is lacking, or this doesn't quite work as I expect. Is this something you'd be willing to change, or to show me how to change or something? In that sense, I'm extremely lucky to have users who are, who start out a request by basically just praising and then asking if they can help in any way, which has been very rewarding. It has been received very well, and I'm very lucky to have great reception so far.
And do you have any particular plans or feature requests or new ideas for the projects in upcoming releases?
Right now, what we are doing is trying to bring things to feature parity. So, like I said, PGCLI and MyCLI has diverged quite a bit in terms of the feature set. A good example is PGCLI's completion engine is slightly more powerful than MyCLI's completion engine. So, if you were to write a join clause, typically joins happen between two tables, and PGCLI is smart enough to introspect both the tables, determine which columns are actually capable of joining with each other, and it'll actually suggest the entire join clause for you. It'll do like table1.id equals table2.id, because IDs are the only thing that you can actually join on because they have the matching data type or something. That level of sophistication is not available in MyCLI. And so we're trying to bring both of these projects to kind of feature parity, and maybe even pull out the SQL completion engine into its own library. So if someone else is building a client, they could just simply include it as import it and include it in their project. Those are some of the things that I could think of off the top of my head. As far as the rest of the thing goes, we had a booth in PyCon, which is an open source booth that PyCon was gracious enough to give us a free booth to pitch our project and promote it. We had a lot of requests from a lot of people about SQLite CLI, and I told everyone that, if you are interested in writing this yourself, I'm happy to help you, and so send me an email, and I gave them all a card. So I'm really hoping that someone will reach out and ask me to show them how to write a SQLite CLI, and we will add that to the suite as well.
And are there any other database engines that you're planning on targeting in the future?
As I sort of hinted, we currently don't have the bandwidth to handle any more databases, simply because creating one of these things will only take a week, but then maintaining it and adding features and fixing bugs as they come up, that is the one that actually kind of drowns us out. So if anyone else is interested in, I did get a couple of requests from people about Oracle CLI, a few requests for writing one for Cassandra, and these are all, great suggestions, and I'd love for someone to reach out and say if they are interested in leading the charge, then I'm happy to help them do it.
Well, for anybody who wants to get in touch with you and follow the work that you're up to and maybe get involved with some of the projects under the DBCLI umbrella, I'll have you add your preferred contact information to the show note. And so with that, I'll move us to the picks. And this week I'm going to choose the movie Downsizing that I watched recently. It's just a really interesting movie with some social commentary and an amusing approach to some of the problems associated with overpopulation. So I thought it was a very entertaining movie and well done, and I recommend that to anybody else who is interested. And so with that, I'll pass it to you, Amjith. Do you have any picks for us this week?
So I like listening to classical music, Western classical music, while I'm programming, because it does not have any words and it's nice and easy to listen to. If you are getting into classical music, after you've exhausted the usual heavyweights like Beethoven and Mozart and Bach and other big heavyweights, if you're interested in violin specifically, I would highly recommend Pablo de Sarasate. He's a composer who wrote a lot of violin music, and all his music is sort of upbeat and very virtuosic, which is kind of hard to play on a violin, but it sounds wonderful when you listen to it. So that would be my pick.
All right. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me today and describe the work that you're doing with the DBCLI projects. I've used some of them myself and found them to be quite useful. So thank you for that, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Appreciate it.